It's not very often that I come across an anime adaptation of a light novel, but the times that I do, I often wonder if I should even continue pursuing them. No matter which one I seem to find, I always leave thinking these shows are some of the worst things I've ever seen. I've only come to this conclusion because, for one, I've never dropped a single light novel anime, and I think I just have the worst luck when it comes to finding a good one. This week, however, I'm going back into the light novel territory to see if today's show has what it takes to change my opinion. This week's review is for the anime adaptation of the light novel series Danmachi, or Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon? A long time ago, the gods came down to the world of their children, seeking excitement. In that process, they locked their powers away and decided to live with them forever in their world and endure all the hardships that came with life. Although they did leave them with one thing, and that was the power to fight monsters, which they call their blessing. It's said that anyone with their blessing becomes their servant and is a part of their familia. Bel Cranel, our protagonist, has this power, as he belongs to and is the only member of the Hestia familia. His reasons for entering the dungeon are influenced by his late grandfather's words, which were to find women to save and to be the hero that they needed. But as he is saved by a woman named Iris Wallenstein, his life changes completely as he falls in love with her and attempts to become stronger to reach up to her level and become the hero that he wants to be. Now, something like this sounds good as a motivation for our hero, as it would help to develop his personality with anyone he meets and further add things to his character based on the situations he puts himself into. But when it comes to Danmachi, Bel's reason to become a hero is all that we're really watching this series for in terms of story. It's not as engaging as I thought it would be, and at no point does anyone ever challenge this notion of being a hero, and what probably could have made the story more interesting for me ultimately comes off as something I'll have to think about on my own time, which I probably won't. There's virtually no plot unless you consider the side stories of some of Bel's party members, as those tend to have better conclusions within a much shorter time frame. There may be something that Bel is striving to get, but I'm not seeing any real goal at the end of it. Bel's journey is all these 12 episodes managed to revolve around, and while it's basically what we're supposed to see, there never seems to be an end in sight that's worth anything, and that's what makes it really disappointing for me. Now, no matter how weak I think the story might be, the world does leave something to be remembered, and I'll talk about those things right now. The world of Aurario is a very lively one, and more reminiscent of a game world than anything else. Even though the areas within the land are more or less your standard fantasy setting, you don't ever feel like the characters within the world don't belong there. I did question a few terms that I heard throughout the show, such as leveling up or the statistics and respawning, but it doesn't take away from anything, as it kinda just works to the show's benefit in its own unique way. Everything feels like an RPG, from the way warriors obtain loot from monsters, how parties are formed, and one's overall progression, which is quite interesting in its own way. Although contrary to typical RPG fashion, no one simply gets stronger by farming monsters, as one would normally assume. One of the ways people get stronger is by completing feats of strength by fighting off very powerful monsters, and makes them more capable of completing the higher floors of the dungeon. People also have advisors for these kinds of things, and permit them into certain floors based on their skill level and statistics. The gods come from a bunch of different backgrounds and have their own perks when it comes to the familia they represent. Some gods can even grant their servants the ability to use magic based on their blessings, but I'm not too sure about how this works entirely. The gods, for the most part, seem to be the only ones who can gauge the power of their servants and update their status from time to time, and inform them of how strong they become, what skills they've gotten, and what magic they can learn, if any. Overall, everything feels right where it needs to be, and even with the game terminology thrown in every once in a while, it feels more like a way to define things to the servants, and not something to really consider too much. And now we get to the characters within the world. We'll start with the protagonist, Bel Cranel, your typical shy and good-natured hero. When his grandfather died, he went off on his quest to become the hero that people could look up to, as well as pick up women in the dungeon. However, because he was so weak, no familia would accept him. That is until one day the goddess Hestia came to him and offered him a spot into hers. As a character, Bel doesn't really have anything else going for him, as he keeps a lot of his good-natured qualities on display, and can come off as quite a dense person when other people try to trick him or are aggressively affectionate towards him. Other than that, I would say that one of his best qualities is his drive. It's what makes him go the lengths he's willing to go, and it's by far his strongest trait. When things get rough for him or his friends, he manages to pull through with sheer willpower, and it's to be respected when he goes through the dungeon and its trials. Inside the dungeon, his determination really stands out, and I wish that he had something to strive for other than the ideal, because this is where he really shines the most. When he's not in the dungeon, I don't find him to be likable at all, as his good boy persona is on display here, and I feel that more could have been done to make him interesting. Next, we have the goddess Hestia. She's a kind and energetic person who helps Bel out in his journey and also has feelings for him outside of simply being his goddess. She tends to get jealous and possessive around Bel when other women are present and doesn't hesitate to keep them away. She's also taken on jobs to help pay off some debts, so she comes off as a hard worker, but not completely void of laziness as other gods might point out. Now, personally, I find Hestia to be quite amusing, as the antics that she gets herself into manage to liven up any scene that she's in. I would also say that her relationship to Bel is fairly good, as they seem to play off of each other nicely. Although I also think that as one of the only comedic reliefs in the show, she can be quite detrimental to a serious moment. Now, most scenes in the show that revolve around both of them aren't too serious, but at times when it is, the show feels the need to ruin a moment with comedy where it shouldn't have been in the first place. Other than that, she's a very likable character and manages to keep you entertained whenever it's her time to shine. And third, we have the reason Bel wants to get stronger, Ais Wallenstein. She is your typical quiet girl who doesn't express her emotions through words often, and she's seen as one of the best characters in the show in terms of her fighting ability as well as her reputation within Orario. She's a level 5 swordswoman and is revered among many, and seems to be the best at everything that she does whenever we see her doing anything. Now, I could see why Bel would want to aspire to be as strong as someone like her. She's incredibly strong, she saved his life, and he wants to better himself because of it. She seems to have a good effect on other people, but when it comes to herself as a character, there's nothing there to really talk about. Rarely anything happens with Ais throughout the series, and because of her personality, she's quite the boring character. Whenever she's with Bel, something kind of happens, but those times are far and few between, as she's constantly on business to even stay long enough on screen to do anything besides being boringly perfect. Finally, we get to the other characters. There's not too many that are worth mentioning, but the ones that stand out the most to me are Bel's party members, Lily and Welf, and I guess the main villain of the series, Freya, the goddess of beauty. Lily is by far the most developed party member, and I might even argue one of the only characters to see any real change outside of level progression within the series. Her backstory is one of my favorite parts of the entire show, and it's a very colorful past, full of her upbringing, her familia, and ultimately her outlook on life. Even with the changes that happen halfway through the series, I would say that everything she feels is completely justified in its own right. Welf, on the other hand, comes into the show a little too late for there to be anything to go on, and I wish he had gotten a similar treatment like Lily did. We get a whole episode devoted to him, but for the most part he just feels like he's along for the ride. He's fairly capable of dealing with the dangers of the dungeon, but he becomes a part of Bel's party because he wants to make weapons and armor for him. I also like his outlook on creating things for people, as it shows what Welf values and takes pride in over everything else, and I really do wish he had gotten more time to develop. Other than these two, Freya doesn't really have much going for her. She rarely ever makes her presence known to the heroes, and when she does, it tends to be from the sidelines when she sends monsters after Bel. Her purpose isn't really explained and only hinted at in an episode or two. Overall, she's really confusing to me, and I wonder if she's even supposed to be a bad guy or not, because there really isn't a motive to go on that I can clearly state. And just to wrap this section up, the side characters, while being very plentiful indeed, are usually just regular faces who you happen to catch here and there. While some might be more important than others, they don't really need to be focused on, and complement any scene that they happen to be in, making things more lively or serious depending on who's being shown. I have very few problems with this part of the show, as I liked almost everything about it. I would say that the sound design was very good for the most part, and I did take notice to some of the subtleties in certain scenes, such as the slight movements in armor, characters eating food, or just the background noise of the city in general. The opening song, Hey World, and the ending theme, Right Light Rise, are about the same to me. They're okay, and you might like them or not, but they don't really do anything for me. As for the visuals and animation, I find them to be very good, as I expect this sort of thing for anime adaptations of light novel series. You'd be pretty hard-pressed to find any issues at all, as there are basically no problems with any of these things. And for those that might be wondering, yes, the fan service is visually appealing. Oh, sorry! There is something for everyone to enjoy, and surprisingly they keep most of it out of the dungeon, so it's only used for comedic effect when the characters are in the city. But what really surprised me the most is that a trope that often comes with a certain thing that happens in most anime was the complete opposite of what I thought it was going to end up being, so credit where credit is due. Also, the fight scenes are pretty good too, as they feel like actual fights and not people simply overpowering a person because what role they play in the story. Everyone feels like they have equal footing, and the violence within some of these fights is pretty well appreciated for someone like me. As it stands, Danmachi manages to be an enjoyable experience from start to finish. You might not like the lack of an actual goal in the story itself like I do, and the ass pulls that show up from time to time might feel like a lazy way of showing progress, but I feel that you may appreciate the world itself, and the cast of characters can do enough to make you watch all the way to the end. I give Danmachi, or Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, a 7 out of 10. I'm glad that this show manages to be something more than what it initially appears to be. I remember reading the synopsis for this and thinking that it was going to be one of those harem shows where the hero's a pervert, but I'm glad I watched it to find out that that wasn't the case. I have very bad luck when it comes to finding a light novel series to watch, but Danmachi manages to be something I may look forward to if it ever gets a second season at some point in the future, and hopefully you feel the same way as well. Alright everyone, that'll do it for this week's review. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you have any thoughts, post them in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video.
But wait! There's more!
なんでいつも逃げちゃうの？